Welcome back, Axie Faction, and oh my god, things are going crazy! Almost every single card in the game has been reworked. We have been getting drops every single day for plant cards, reptile cards, aquas, birds, bugs, and beasts. If you want to catch my full reaction live, then make sure to check out my Twitch. I've been going over the reviews every single morning. All the VODs are still there, so you can check them out at your leisure. But today, we're going to be discussing 3 theory-crafted comps that I am very excited to try out in Season 2. But before we get started, please do not take this info and run to the marketplace and start buying up Axies, because everything in the game is still subject to change, and we haven't even seen all of the changes that are still yet to come. This is purely speculation at this point, so take everything with a grain of salt. Let's get right into it. First off, we have a plant Leafy Team with a couple of new changes and additions. But do not worry, I'll walk you through every step of my thought process for each of these cards. Now, Leafy Teams have always excelled at both dealing high damage and being very tanky, being able to put up high shield and healing as well. And some of these new card changes just complement that strategy so well. Let's start off with the tail. We have Cattail. Target any ally, heal for 60, and apply taunt to self for 4 turns. So this is our taunt engine. Taunting is very important in a Leafy team because you need to be able to divert damage to different Axies and let your leaves passively heal you up over time. Now, having our taunt on the tail allows us to free up the horns. Usually you'd need to play Cactus there to get the taunt, but Cattail I think is a very good substitute, which allows us to play Bamboo Spear, and we'll be playing Bamboo Spear on all 3 Axies to maximize the value and make sure we're getting as many leaves as possible. Now let's hop over to eyes. Why did I pick Blossom for my back lane Axie? Why would I pick a 0-cost card on my back laner? But that 0-cost card is actually very important, I think, to protecting us from sleep. Sleep has actually been reworked. The new text says, while this Axie has sleep, next time it plays a card, negate that card, then remove sleep. Meaning, if your Axie is slept in the back lane, all you need to do is play a single card to get rid of it. And what better to use than a 0-cost card? Sleep is very, very prevalent now, and in the late game, you definitely don't want to be wasting an energy card to get rid of that sleep. Now, if you wanted to get even fancier, we can throw Ancient Root onto Blossom. That'll give it retain, making sure it is in your hand the turn that he sleeps you and you really, really need it. It also grants you a leaf when played, which is a extra little benefit. Now, as for Leafy, that card has gone through no changes. It is still exactly the same as it was from Season 1, and of course, that is our biggest damage dealer. When we have 3 leaves, it'll consume all 3 leaves and deal an extra 10 damage per hit. With the right rune on that Axie, you can be dealing upwards of 50 damage per hit, 150 damage for 1 energy. That's why this comp is so good. Pumpkin is another card that has not been changed. It is just great shield and allows you to draw a card when they attack into you, which is going to make your hand much more consistent from turn to turn. And for the mouthpiece, I chose Sirius because it is the highest damage plant mouthpiece there is. Now, it does come with a bit of a detriment. If initial, you'll deal 15 bonus damage and apply sleep to yourself for 2 turns. Now, that sleep is pretty devastating, but remember, we have Blossom in our hand with the Ancient Root attached, so it's retained, and if we need to use this as initial to get that bonus damage, then we can just throw the Blossom out to cure ourselves. No harm done. Now, one of the coolest things about this comp is that every Axie is both damage and utility. Your frontliner is just as powerful as your backliner, and if we move up, you'll see what I mean. As our midliner, we have a very similar looking Axie. Again, Cattail for the taunt to pull damage away from the front. We have Bamboo Spear to make sure we're getting max value from those leaves. As the mouthpiece here, we are playing Zigzag, and that is to protect ourselves from a comp like Reflectiles, right? This team should perform fairly well against high shield comps because Leafy randomly hits, which allows you to bypass the front lane potentially and start damaging the back lane. But having Zigzag to prevent them from putting up these huge shield walls will be very valuable as well. Now for the eyes on this midliner, we are going with Cucumber Slice. This card is amazing now. Now, Cucumber Slice is now a 1-cost card with a base stat of 10 healing. It still heals the entire team, but now it has Retain. And for each turn this card is retained, you will add 10 bonus healing to the entire effect, capping at 50. But still, healing for 50 on all 3 of your Axies is a total of 150 stats for 1 energy, which is just mind-blowing, especially considering we're already taunt juggling and diverting damage across the entire team. Now moving up to the front lane, we do have one more surprise, and I am so excited for this one. And of course, I'm referring to Snake Jar. Snake Jar has such a crazy effect. Target any ally to heal for 60. If the target has less than 200 HP, apply Snake Jar. What does that mean? Snake Jar is a new status effect that says Snake Jar cannot be dispelled. If this unit doesn't die within 6 turns, deal 100 damage to all enemies. That is insane. That is 360 stats for 1 energy. Of course, it's gonna be tough, right? They have to be under 200 HP, so you have to use it late game. And you also have to keep that Axie alive for like 6 turns, right? But that is exactly what the Leafy team excels at. Being able to divert damage here and there to protect your Axies. Being able to heal, put up huge shields, and deal huge amounts of damage. It's such a good combination for this strat. Not to mention, our biggest damage output is Leafy, which is a random hit card, meaning our damage is already going to be split among all Axies. So having Snake Jar also deal damage across the board is not devastating at all. This isn't a traditional front to back team. And finally, the last card to talk about is Silence Whisper. We have it on the mouth part for the front just to tech against poison teams. We know how devastating poison looks right now, so having Silence Whisper seems like a fairly safe bet. So what do y'all think about the team? I could not be more excited to try this out in the arena, but only time will tell. All right, moving on to reptiles. We've got a poison comp here with a few changes from what we'd consider traditional. Now, this comp is hard focused on stalling out your opponent and draining their health with those poison stacks. Of course, we have Small Frill and Green Thorns as our poison engine. You're gonna find these on every single Axie in this team. Now, we are also playing Tiny Turtle. Tiny Turtle has been reworked. It no longer provides stun, it now provides sleep, which is what we're gonna use to help stall our opponent. Now, a lot of people are considering Tiny Turtle to be a bad card now because it is applying sleep to yourself for 4 turns. But remember, sleep can be removed by the use of any card, and we have a 0-cost card here on this frontliner as well. We're also playing Gecko on our mid and backliner, so for the off chance we don't have Gecko in our hand for the frontliner, we can play Gecko off our mid and our back and heal that sleep anyways. Now let's talk about Scaly Spoon, because this card is pivotal in this build to keep your opponent at bay and make sure he doesn't ramp up over time. In case you haven't noticed, with these new changes, most of the classes revolve around some sort of status buff. We're looking at leaves, bubbles, feathers. All of these are strats that help the Axie power up over time so they can get to that really devastating late game. But Scaly Spoon actually says if the target's shield is broken by an opponent, dispel the attacker 2 times, which will be removing a lot of those buffs they've been working so hard to collect. And finally, we have Iguana on the tail, and this is to counter any sort of sustain that might pop up in the meta. In fact, you can even put Rocket Stamp on Iguana so that you can always target the Axie that he uses Silence Whisper on. Now, moving on to the mid lane, you're gonna notice a lot of similarities. This comp is hard focused on one specific strat. The only difference on this Axie is Grass Snake. This allows you to target any enemy and increase the number of poison stacks on the target by 50%. That is pretty significant. If you use this card on an Axie that already had 20 stacks of poison on it, those stacks would be increased up to 30, 10 stacks of poison, as well as 45 damage. And that 10 stacks of poison is gonna do an extra 30 damage on the next turn, and even more the turns after that. It's such great value. And finally, at the bottom, we have our back laner. only difference here is Gila. If you've played the game in Season 1, I'm sure you're familiar with Gila. You want to wait for the end of the game when you've gotten all those poison stacks out there. You're sitting at 20 poison stacks here, 30 poison stacks here. You throw out the Gila to finish the match. This is your game ender right here. And honestly, that just about does it. I know it's very similar to what we've seen already with just a few minor adjustments, some quality of life stuff, I think. What do you guys think though? Is this actually gonna be really worth it, or is stuff like Silence Whisper just gonna totally destroy this comp? Now, before we head into this Aqua comp, I do wanna say that I'm not 100% sold on Aquas as a strategy right now. I thought that there were a lot of great card changes that would be great to tech into other Axies, right? Like the Oranda Horn. I think we're gonna see Oranda Horn on almost every single Axie build, whether it's a beast, a bug, a plant. We're gonna see Orandas everywhere. I think the goal in making all of these card reworks was to really define the class identity between all the different Axie classes. But in terms of Aqua, I felt like they already had a very strong archetype, a very strong class identity. They were aggressive with curse cards and they had bubbles too. All in all, it worked. Of course, it was overshadowed by things like Fury Beasts back in Season 1, but it was a cohesive strategy. And as it stands now, I just don't know if I see Aquas having that sort of class identity that everything else seems to be evolving into. I might be totally alone in this opinion. It really doesn't matter in the long run as long as the game continues to improve, but go ahead and let me know what you think. All right, this is the Aqua comp I came up with, and it's all about gaining as many energy fragments as possible and letting your backlaner finish out the game. Now let's take a look at the backliner, because the core of the strategy revolves around Navaga. Navaga is now a power card that says whenever you gain 10 energy fragments, they are consumed. After consuming 40, this effect stops. Then the energy cost of this Axie's cards are reduced by 1 until the rest of the battle. This is such an interesting concept for a card. I actually really like the idea, but I am still very skeptical on whether or not this strategy can work, and I'll get into why a little bit later. So basically the idea is you ramp up, get as many energy fragments as possible. Navaga then procs. Now all of these cards are reduced by 1 cost. Sleepless is a 0 cost. Sea Slug is a 0 cost. Risky Fish is a 0 cost. Beach is a 1 cost for 125 damage. And then once you've thrown out all these Axie's cards, you can still use Perch because you'll still have 2 energies left over. Now on this Axie, we don't need a 0 cost card to help tech against sleep potentially, because we have Sea Slug. Sea Slug cleanses 1 debuff, and then you gain 1 cleanser, which will stay with you until another debuff comes your way. Beach is an interesting card. It might not be the best 2-cost card to throw in here, but it's decent damage and it has a great effect. Remove all secrets from target. That'll be great for avoiding reflectile damage or getting yourself dispelled from attacking into a scaly spoon. It has a lot of potential for use. Now let's talk about Perch, because it's one of those cards that has a very interesting new effect. Perch says consume all available energy. Attack all enemies. Base damage is equal to 100% per energy spent. Then deal 20% bonus damage per energy spent. Jesus Christ. There is a lot of math involved in this card, but don't worry, there is a little cheat sheet table chart that you can use to do all those calculations for you. Now, I do think Perch would be best used in an AoE comp, but until we see the rest of the cards, I just don't know if there's enough AoE to really make an AoE comp at the moment, so we're just gonna have to wait and see. And to be perfectly honest, I would also very easily switch this out for Blue Moon as well, just to have another 0-cost attack card that'll allow you to draw again. Potentially even drawing back into another 0-cost attack card and just keeping it rolling. Now moving on to the midliner. This guy is hard focused on those energy fragments. Double Nemo, Clamshell, and Goldfish. Risky Fish just for the damage, and Garo for the fragile utility. Now, Nemo is an interesting card. For a 0 energy cost, it grants you an energy fragment, and then it allows you to search your deck for another Nemo card. So it helps you ramp up your Navaga, and it thins your deck as well. Now you may think you want to search out for another Nemo tail and just keep that dice rolling, but the thing is, Nemo ears actually diminish in returns the less Nemos are in your deck, and because Nemo tail is banish, once you use this one, you're going to be getting less and less value from your Nemo ears. So instead of searching out for another Nemo tail, you want to go straight to the ears to get max value from the ears before you play the second tail on the frontline Axie. Garo is simply here to help prevent those huge shield walls we might see from Reflectiles, Risky Fish, high damage card, and then we have Goldfish and Clamshell, which have both been reworked to help ramp up those energy fragments as well. Now for the frontliner, it's going to be looking very, very similar to the midliner. The only real difference here is Sleepless instead of Garo, and that's because Vulnerable is a lot more applicable than Fragile in most situations. Now I threw Lamb here on the mouth as well. Lamb clearly has a lot of damage output, but it's very situational, right? You only want to play it when it's the perfect time to play it, and that's when the Axie is at max HP. So the later it gets into the game, my thinking is the less likely you're going to be able to get good value from this card. So putting it on the frontliner to me seems like the only thing that kind of makes sense. And that is the whole comp from beginning to end. Now it looks decent on paper. It might even perform decently as well, but I am still skeptical, and let me show you why. Alright, I apologize for the quality of this image. I decided to have a stab at MS Paint, and I remembered why I only ever use Photoshop Elements. But anyway, I basically just went through turn by turn what it would look like if I got best case scenario for this comp, right? Turn 1, you start off with Navaga, right? It's initial, and you want to start getting that ramp up as soon as possible. You don't want to get that first energy burst. So your first turn is Navaga for sure. And that leaves you with 1 energy fragment. Now turn 2, you get a decent hand, right? Nemo tail gives you an energy fragment. You grab the Nemo ear, that gives you 4 energy fragments, and then you play Clamshell, which could give you 2 energy fragments, bringing your total up to 8 at the end of round 2. Now, turn 3 comes around. You play Goldfish. You have the Nemo ear in hand, so you get that extra benefit. 3 fragments. Then you play the Nemo ear, 4 fragments. Then you play Clamshell, 2 fragments. Decent turn. That brings you all the way up to 17. Now, turn 4. Technically, turn 8. Round 4, right? This is your 4th turn. You play Sleepless, get Vulnerable on them. You play Goldfish to get the 3 fragment buff. Then you play your last Nemo tail for +1. Then Risky Fish for your last energy for another +1. Then you're at 23 fragments at the end of round 4, technically turn 8, which means following this pattern, you're most likely not going to be proccing Navaga until about round 8, turn 16, only 1 turn before Blood Moon kicks in. So this is going to be a very risky situation. I'm just not sure if it works. I guess in the end, we'll have to wait and see how long games typically run. It could be that Blood Moon is pushed back and games just tend to take a little bit longer than before. In this case, it might work out. We'll have to wait and see. But that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what comp was your favorite in the comments below. What would you change if you could? And until next time, I'll see you tomorrow morning on Twitch.